Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Employee Advocacy and Influence podcast. My name is Lewis Gray, and my co host, as always, is Elliot Elsley. We just wrapped up a really insightful chat with Chris Sheen, who's the director of social media over at Celonis. And honestly, if you're trying to scale employee advocacy, especially in a global, fast growing B2B organization, you're going to want to listen to this one. Chris shares how Celonis has grown their advocacy program from something small to now having over 1,000 employees signed up, with about half of them actively posting each month. We talked about how and why employee reach has actually started to dwarf their corporate channels and how that's been a huge light bulb moment for leadership. We also got into the reality of managing an always on program, the challenges of keeping employee advocates engaged, and how they're encouraging personalization at scale in an era where AI generated content is seemingly everywhere. So stick around. There's a lot of practical takeaways in here, whether you're just starting your advocacy program or trying to scale it to the next level. Let's get into it. Wonderful. So, Chris, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. Would you mind just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and your role at Celonis?
Yeah, I'm director of social media at Celonis. I've been at the company for about 3 years now, and we are a B2B software business, serve many companies all over the world to help them make their processes work better.
Love that. And we've obviously had a conversation ahead of time, Chris. I know a little bit about the employee advocacy program you guys are managing at Celonis, but I'm excited to just unpack that and understand how you're managing it at the moment. I know we will come onto the subject of AI and the importance of authenticity with employee advocacy programs today. But given the size of the organization, I thought a nice place to start might just be, how advocacy came about at Celonis. So what made you guys want to invest in advocacy?
Yeah, I think the really quick word is reach. So we've got over 375,000 followers across our social channels now. So when you look at the kind of corporate part of Celonis, LinkedIn obviously being the biggest because we're a B2B company, unsurprisingly. But compare that sort of 375,000 to over 1.8 million followers across our advocates, and that's those who are signed up to the advocacy program. There's just untapped potential in terms of what you can do with advocacy. I think that the importance of it has almost grown over time as advocacy has grown within the company. I'd say that when I first joined, it kind of probably represented like the 20% of the role that we did. It was kind of like all focus on the corporate channels and let's see if we can grow advocacy over time. It's just grown over the years in importance to about 50% of what we do now is always advocate focused as well. And to be honest, it's only going one direction where it will become the biggest part of what we do. And again, in really simple terms, it's reach. It's just that we can reach so many more people through the advocate network. And the growth of it is, as I say, still feels like this is untapped potential because we're really proud of the number of people we have signed up to the advocate program. But, we're over 3,000 people at Celonis, and, in a dream world, everyone would be signed up. So yeah, there's just huge potential in it.
That's always the utopian view, isn't it? Let's just get absolutely everybody signed up to this. Why aren't they all? I was just interested. It's a conversation I've had with so many of our clients where you mentioned the corporate page following and reach being, the big metric there against advocate networks. A lot of clients that I've worked with find that's like a big milestone moment when you overtake the corporate page, and you can notably overtake the corporate page. Just wondering if that was like a big conversation point. I've had so many people communicate that to C-suite, communicate that to boards to go, hey, look, this is all of a sudden why we're doing it. And that's a big like snowball effect for people to go, oh, this suddenly will all make sense and we need to go 100% into this.
Yeah, I think it's honestly, to be completely transparent, I think it surprised us. For the first time we looked into it, it was already over 1 million in terms of the reach on advocacy by the time we'd really properly looked into it compared to what we had on the corporate channels at the time. And I think we were like, oh, wow. I mean, it's such a headline figure because the thing about social media is, which I always think is kind of understated in a way, is that it's one of those marketing channels that most of your metrics as a marketeer are private, aren't they? They're kind of your secret, that could be website views, podcast listeners, right? Virtually everything is almost private, whatever it might be. But social media followers is like the most public thing you can have. You can look at a company, go, I never heard of them, and then you suddenly go, oh wow, they've got 1 million followers on LinkedIn. They're a big deal. So I think it can be seen as a vanity net metric, but actually it's a very, very public metric. So I think it's also a metric that people immediately get. There's no explaining needed around what a follower means. It means that they're interested in you, right? So I think having that as almost a counterpoint to the power of advocacy is really helpful, because everyone gets it. There's no explaining what the metric means. And then when you can say, by the way, this has become a real company focus to grow that. Look at what advocacy is already doing. It's incredibly powerful. So yeah, I'd say it was a nice surprise for us, and now it's become just a core part of our message, at least to senior people that you want to kind of get to buy into the power of it.
For sure. I think you see that so often as well, where people understand why they're spending money on a corporate page. They're like, well, we have to spend money on the corporate LinkedIn page and all of the other social media pages because that's the done thing. And I think it's people going, oh no, we could also spend money on this and develop this in different ways. And it's often a hell of a lot cheaper than doing a lot of paid ads to drive your followers on the corporate page as well.
Yeah, I was going to say 100%, completely agree. And to be honest, LinkedIn themselves, so many changes that LinkedIn are making at the moment, which are causing us all sorts of challenges from a corporate side, because for a company accounts, I wouldn't say it's become completely pay to play, but it's definitely a big part of the push that they want you to do from a company side. So almost the importance of advocacy is just growing as well, in terms of like, if we really want to get the message out there, then we have to be using advocates, because relying on a corporate page, if you're not willing to put a lot of money behind it, just unfortunately isn't working as well as it used to.
But something I think it would be really helpful for our listeners to know, just because I think it will just give so much context on, a lot of this conversation, but it might be a difficult question to answer because I know this is probably changing constantly. But do you know roughly how many advocates you have signed up for your program at the moment?
Yeah, so we have around 1,000 signed up to the program, of which over half of that are what we call active, so posting every month. And yeah, like constantly the goal is to get more of those. It's kind of a classic funnel, right? We want more people actually part of the program, and then we want more of them posting every month to be active. And what we look at from a success sort of criteria from our point of view is exactly that. So like, how many people are actively posting every month? What's the reach of those posts? So exactly what we were talking about earlier. How often are they posting, and what are those posts reaching? And then probably the most important thing, because on the face of it, they are vanity metrics at a very top level, but what is the impact of those posts? So impact depends on the content, right? So if it's an amazing customer story video, for example, then we want, how many people have watched that video? That's the thing we really care about with that. How many people have seen that story? For something like an event, is maybe a great example, like a webinar or an event we're selling tickets for, how many people have clicked the link and then bought a ticket? And I think particularly that last one, once you can start to show that impact of conversions and what it's actually happening in terms of impact, that's when I think the internal stakeholders really start to get it. And for us, it's actually really easy at the moment for me to prove the importance of advocacy, because it's basically almost always double in terms of the impact. So if we have I'm looking at the data recently, we have this amazing video series we do called Face Value. It's really fun. We get some really cool speakers. And I was doing the report for the team recently. I was like, almost exactly double the number of signups that we've got for that event is through the advocate posts. And it always surprises people, because people look at the company posts with the big follower base and think that's where all the focus should be. And it's like, well, actually, no, we get even more from all of those advocates posts added together, and all of the people reaching the right people. And so it's when we look at kind of the scale and the importance of it, those are the things that we really care about.
I think that's really interesting, and this will sound almost silly based on the fact of what it sounds like you're doing. There's still a lot of companies that don't report on this in that format. There's still a lot of companies that don't report on, hey, here's organic social, here's paid social, here's advocacy as 3 separate line items. It's a separate thing that they either don't report on, or they try and bucket it into their organic because they want to bloat those figures or whatever it is. It's great to hear that you go, hey, here's what the company page did. Here's what the advocacy program's done for us. Here are 2 completely different line items, essentially. It's for anyone that is running a program, it's such a big thing to start to do and start to report on from that perspective.
Yeah, completely agree. And actually, interesting talking about how we report on things. The big shift that we're going through right now, actually, is that almost just historically, we've always talked about corporate first. So classic reporting, and advocacy almost becomes an and finally in the reporting conversations. Oh, and finally we have the advocate bit at the end, and we're shifting that now. So we're starting to shift the way we report to talk about advocacy first, because why wouldn't you? It's the bigger numbers. You know, when you're talking about the whatever the number is, we're at the reach of the post, impressions, engagements, sign-ups, whatever it might be. It's the bigger number. So I think that sometimes, you know, the order of information, the way you put it is really important as well. So we're just trying to sort of shift that message internally. I think yeah. And I'm always, you know, to my team saying, you know, the only metric that really matters is how many are active. So, you know, being signed up and not even doing anything doesn't count. So really that 500 or so number is the one that we really that need to go. And I think, you know, you're not going to get everyone, but I've always had this, you know, because it's a round number, right? But I've always had this idea that getting 1,000 advocates sharing every month is a realistic goal. It's a third of the company, like you say. It feels like that would be about right in terms of go to market, and it feels like, yeah, if we can get through to enough people and show that it isn't a big burden, it isn't a huge job, and here's why it matters, then hopefully we can get there.
Yeah, it's interesting you say once a month, and I think once a month is like a good baseline metric to work from, right? For somebody, hey, there should be some in a 4-week period. I'd like to think there's something here that you'd be able to share onto LinkedIn. I'm interested, and I have this conversation quite a lot with lots of different people of when you start to scale that out and you start to reach 1,000 and 2,000 employees across the business, there actually will be some people, I suspect, that only want to share once every 3 months. It might not be ideal from your perspective, but do you account for those people? Do you kind of allow, you know, if somebody's posting on a semi-regular basis, maybe 3-4 times a year, do you discount them from a program from your side of things? Or would you go, no, we're just thrilled that they're a part of it and hopefully they start to share more?
Really good question. Okay, so there's probably a few ways we can sort of spin that. So one is that once a month is how we report from our point of view. It just feels like a solid number. Our advice to people is aim for once a week, and actually goes twofold there, because maybe we'll come into this a bit later in terms of one of the biggest challenges and the misconceptions, I guess, about why people resist advocacy. But I think that the biggest misconception is that it's going to be a big time commitment. And people are like, look, I just haven't got time for this. I don't have time for social media. It's not my thing. And my thing's like, okay, it's 5 minutes, 5 minutes a week, one post a week, put it in your calendar as a task, set and forget, it's done. In terms of back to your question around discounting people, we do have a cutoff. So our cutoff is basically if you haven't posted in 90 days, then we contact you and say, look, we're gonna take you out of the program and consider. So they have the last chance. We give them a chance to say, no, I still want to be involved. But general feeling is, I can't remember something. If I haven't used an app on my phone for 3 months, I've probably forgotten about it, right? It probably is like that game I downloaded to play that I've just forgotten about. So that's our general approach, and it feels about right. And also the program's always open for people to come back to, right? So if someone says, I want to get back involved, then great. And we do get that sometimes. People, my account has been disabled. What can I do? And it's okay, well, that's good news. You can come back. We thought you left.
Yeah, here's why. Just to let you know, you never used it. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that before. I think it's one of the interesting parts of advocacy, because it's great that you just go, yeah, just come back in. It's absolutely fine. No big deal. It's all doors always open from that perspective. I think you do see some people really gatekeep it and say, hey, if you're not going to post once a week, then you're not part of the advocacy program. And I think that's actually the burdensome part for a lot of employees, where they go, whoa, all of a sudden this has come from, I'd like this to post a little bit more on social and see what that's all about, versus you are now Gary Vaynerchuk and you need to post 19 times a day. And if you don't do that, you'll be cast to the wind from the advocacy program. And I think finding a healthy balance, obviously you don't want to spend a load of money on user seats and things like that you're perhaps not utilizing to the same degree, but finding a healthy way of going, hey, we'd like you to use it consistently. If you don't use it consistently, we'll drop you out, and you can always come back if you change your mind.
Yeah, exactly that. I think as well, it's almost sometimes, I would say our best advocates, maybe best is an interesting word, my favorite advocates are the ones that the advocacy program has kind of opened the door to social media for them. So they might post once or twice through the advocacy program, but they're equally posting once or twice by themselves. They're doing their own content that isn't part of advocacy, that is, related to what they're really passionate about, that we wouldn't put in the program, or they're going to an event or anything else. And I think that's the dream, right? That they have this blend of content that is obviously sort of Celonis approved, that we've shared with them, and they have the stuff that they want to do themselves. And that's why I kind of always say that it's simple, it's easy for people to remember. Once a week, just start there, and obviously flex either way if you want to.
I mean, I'm glad you started to talk about some of the challenges, Chris, because I think there will be people listening to this who are maybe running programs of their own, who would absolutely bite your hand off for the chance to get 1,000 advocates signed up for their programs. Because I mean, we've seen programs with hundreds, sometimes tens of advocates that are wildly successful. So to get to, I mean, I take my virtual hat off to you, my metaphorical hat off to you. I think it's a hell of an achievement to get to that point. But obviously, it doesn't come without a few hurdles, and I'm sure you will have encountered some along the way. Obviously, you've just touched on a few there, but anybody who's gone through the peaks and troughs of social will know that just having consistent performance and that kind of baseline performance is still a pretty nice place to be at, to be honest with you. But Chris, something that you mentioned on a little while ago was the fact that you have people who are, like you said, it's kind of like the gold standard when it comes to advocacy, when people are posting their own content as well as the Celonis approved content. But something that a number of organizations struggle with when it comes to that is obviously balancing brand consistency. And this tends to be an issue that organizations in regulated industries will have to deal with, because obviously the very nature of their industry is that they are kind of controlled by a governing body. It's, higher than the organization itself. But how do you approach the balance between brand consistency and freedom to express with your advocates? And then, do you even have to do that?
It's a really good question. I think if we stay within the confines of the advocacy program, I think the simplest way I'd put it is we control the what, as in here are the things that you should be posting about, that we recommend that you post about, and we really trust our employees to communicate the how. So how do you want to communicate that? And we really encourage people to personalize that message and put it authentically in their own words. So we obviously always provide like recommended copy for posts, but the direction we really want to take people on is that put that in your own words and give your perspective on it. If it's not even your own perspective, at least make it sound like you've written it. And we're on a journey in the right direction there. So about a year ago, about 25% of advocates edited their posts. I checked the data just before we jumped on today, and up to about 40% in the last 90 days of people editing posts, which isn't bad. But in a dream world, it'd be 100. It'd be 100% of people putting their own words. And I think I would argue that it's from a marketing point of view and performance point of view on social media, it's more important than ever that it feels like someone has actually authentically done it themselves. It's so important, and we can talk more about AI probably a bit later on that front. But I also believe that we have obviously social media guidelines and policies and things like that, but there's an element of just trusting people to do the right thing and have the right tone and get the message right that we give them. And yeah, maybe philosophically, I'm believing people that most of the time will do the right thing, and if there are the occasional times people don't, then it's a relatively quick, and you edit or remove that, and you just try and handle it quickly, don't you?
I love the common sense approach to that. I've heard many non-common sense approaches towards content, and it is refreshing to hear we're just going to trust everybody.
Of course, there's going to be outliers, but it's much better to focus on the positive outcome, which you'll get, which is the biggest one.
Yeah, I think the personalization is obviously a really big point of it as well, particularly now. I think when advocacy was like 6-7 years ago, when I first started kind of working in this space, it was quite easy to actually not do a huge amount of personalization and have, a small number of employees almost all saying basically the same thing on LinkedIn. And it was easy because nobody else was posting onto LinkedIn at that time. The stats and the number of people that were actually even active on LinkedIn, you only had to post something once a month and you were suddenly top 1% LinkedIn user. It really wasn't a big challenge. These days, you need that personalization to stand out. You really want that. There's enough people that have suddenly twigged that this is a really powerful platform to connect with people, that personalization is important, really, really important. If you're up to 40% that are kind of writing their own post captions within an advocacy program, that's a really, really nice place to be.
Part of like of actually just the post doing well as well. I think one of the things people always say is, oh, how can we get my post to do better? And actually the first thing you look at is you go through the post and say, well, it's really simple, just put it in your own words. You know, many of your followers will know who you are and how you speak, and will very quickly realize you haven't written that. So the you know, easiest thing you can do is change it. And then the other thing I always say to people, because people are, oh, you know, I'm not a marketing person, I'm not super comfortable writing, is like, you know, 112 characters, that's about what you get before that see more button on LinkedIn. So that's really not many. You know, write the first line yourself. If you only do that, it will do better than if you didn't. So I think keep it simple for people like that as well can really help.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you've touched on the well, basically what you said there about people writing things themselves has unfortunately led to I mean, if you spend any amount of time on LinkedIn at the moment, you'll see the rise of AI generated content. And like you said, people can see when a post hasn't been written by somebody. The concern used to be that it was provided by the organization. And again, people could smell it a mile off. It was overly promotional. It was full of marketing jargon. And now, you know, it's kind of swung the other way where it's like, hey, people are posting for themselves. That's great. But then it's, you know, it's, unless you spent a good amount of time using LLMs and training yourself on prompting and things like that, generally speaking, the LinkedIn posts that it does spit out are kind of very easy to spot in the LinkedIn feed, I would say. I won't go into too much detail because I'm sure if you spend any amount of time on LinkedIn, you'll be able to see it. But you did mention in a previous conversation that your program does utilize generative AI. I think it's a really interesting use case. But would you mind just telling our listeners, and I guess Elliot as well, just how you're using generative AI in your program currently?
Yeah, so we use it religiously as a team, as a social team. There's 4 of us in the team, and it's a sparring partner really for all of the copywriting we do, writing scripts for videos, generating ideas, analyzing data, like everything. It is the 5th member of the team. But I'm the probably the biggest believer in AI that I know in marketing. I really strongly believe in it, but I'm also the most scared of it in another way as well, in terms of the bad ways it could be done as well. So we use it for so much of that, and actually we've heavily trained our AI to help write in our tone of voice. So it's super trained on kind of how we write, really trained, I'd say more than anything, to not write like B2B companies always write. I'd say that's the biggest thing we've trained it on, is to like save ourselves from writing, you know, like a B2B company, save ourselves from writing, you know, the classic one I would say, thrilled to announce. When you announce anything on LinkedIn, is the most overused phrase of all time. But anything like that just feels very, very B2B, it's almost trained to stop us doing that. And, you know, ultimately making sure that we have the final say. So I'm stealing this line because I heard it today on a LinkedIn post, ironically, but it was like, you know, it's the co-pilot, but you're the pilot. You know, you have the final say in terms of what goes out. So I think that's really important. What I'd say is, kind of to your point, Lewis, it's a huge challenge for I think for social media platforms, for marketing in general, is just how much content now is written by AI with very little piloting. You know, it is just, here you go, that'll do. And I think it's a big challenge that people and the companies are going to have to try and solve, because the example I always think of is, I used to be in sales back in the day, like going back to when I started my career, doing like outreach, cold calling and sales emails, right? So, and we've probably, every single one of us on the call, have either received or sent sales outreach emails, right? And the thing I always say about an outreach email, whether you receive it or you send it, is that you have like 3 seconds to make it feel like you've actually written that email personally to the person, and it isn't a copy and paste job, right? So, you know, when you get an email, it's like, hi, Chris, a big fan of everything you're doing at Celonis. And then you're like, are you actually? Or, and then if there isn't something that immediately says, I saw you on this, I really like this, I'm like, oh, you've just is copy and paste, or it is now probably automated, right? And I think that LinkedIn has now become the same thing, where within 3 seconds, you're like, oh, is this oh, no, it isn't. This is a copy, and this is a ChatGPT written post. You know, it's not actually done by the person. And I think that everyone's sort of spidey senses are going to be really attuned to AI versus human. And so the most important thing now, advice I'd have is make it look human, make it feel human. Even if you've got AI to help you write it, as we do, make sure that you have clearly had the final say on it, and it doesn't feel like it's, you know, sparing it, like spelling out kind of everything. And I think it's probably also one of the biggest challenges on LinkedIn, specifically for us, is that you have so many people that you've worked with in the past, for example, at previous companies, who never would have posted on LinkedIn, never would have been comfortable to do so, wouldn't have felt they could write. And now everyone, they are like, they're posting all sorts, constantly, which in one way is a really good thing. But on the other hand, it's only because they've got AI now. And so the level of competition you're up against has never been bigger. And, quality versus quantity, how many of those posts are great? How many of them are fairly generic? I think it's a balance, really. There's some that I look at, guys that I've worked with before, who I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. Like, you're now putting on LinkedIn the sort of stuff we would have chatted about that I know you're really passionate about over a beer, and you'd never would have put on like social media. So this is great that you now have a tool to help you do that. And then you have the other side of people, you're like, oh, this is just rubbish. Won't name the names.
I couldn't agree more. I'm just going back to what you mentioned at the beginning there of, I really like the idea of basically telling an LLM to forget everything it knows about B2B writing and to ignore all other. And actually, it's a really interesting point for if you are using ChatGPT to help you write LinkedIn posts.
Chris, something that you mentioned before was obviously the importance of telling people to make it their own. And while we are on the AI topic, are you doing anything at the moment, whether it's just yourself managing the program or within Celonis, to kind of educate employees on how to use this effectively and how to add their own tone of voice to these posts?
It's an ongoing thing, really. It's just an ongoing message of training. And I'd never say don't use AI, because we use AI. I think it's actually brilliant. I probably would say do use AI, but just make sure that it's done in the right way, right? It's training people to make it their own. And I think the biggest training that I give to people is not to overthink it. Not to look for perfect, I think. So one of the, Celonis is a really global company. So we have, advocates all over, and, for example, Spain and Germany are two of our biggest offices, right? So English is not the first language there, but a lot of the content we provide is in English, let's be fair. Like we obviously do localized content as well. But so therefore, in a weird way, you don't want the post to look in absolutely pristine, perfect English. There's an argument, a mistake in the grammar will probably mean the post will do better. A different experiment you could play with it. I put a mistake in this post. Like, again, things like that, probably perfect isn't the thing to always aim for. So I think the general advice I give to people is just don't overthink it, keep it simple, and just give a one-liner perspective, just something that makes it you. I think, again, going back to that sales email example, when I used to talk to the sales team, when I used to work with them, just in your first line, just make it really clear that you haven't copied and pasted this whole email. You've got one line to say to someone. If someone messaged me after this and say, hi Chris, listen to you on the Disseminate podcast with Lewis and Elliot, really liked this point that you made. If someone did, then I'll know they've listened to the podcast and that it isn't a copy and paste job. And then immediately they're probably going to get a reply, because I'll be like, oh, okay, thanks for listening.
One of my favorite ones that I get in my inbox is when people are using LinkedIn to scrape their information. We updated Disseminate's name on LinkedIn to Disseminate, the employee advocacy platform. And suddenly every cold sales email that I got was, hey, Lewis, love the work that you're doing at Disseminate the employee advocacy platform. The intention was only ever to let people know what we do, but it's been a win-win really in that regard. Chris, I digress because I wanted to come back to the AI thing. But something that I'm actually really gravitating towards, just an idea that I really like, especially in B2B, is people deliberately writing posts badly. So you kind of touched on this, and I don't mean writing bad LinkedIn posts, but something that you often see in the world of B2C is people kind of just writing corporate social media posts like they've just typed them out on their phone. So we spoke about title capitalization. They won't capitalize the first word in a sentence and things like that. Maybe they'll be overly expressive. And an example I always example is when people say hey, they'll just add like 4 Y's to the end of it to sound overly friendly. But I quite like that, and I'm seeing it creeping into B2B. And I think it just kind of adds that splash of authenticity. But we spoke about this when we had a conversation a few weeks ago about kind of wanting B2B to ditch the boring. What does that mean for you in practice?
It means so many things. I think it's the B2B marketing is still troubled by a lot of boring marketing. And LinkedIn is the best example, I think, in terms of if you go through it and just see what companies post and the way that they post. And I think it's still so ripe for disruption, I think. I mean, I joke about thrilled to announce kind of copy in B2B social, but generally, like, there are so many different examples of those kind of the way that companies write that is so similar to each other, that I think is number one. I think I always look at like content as being a big thing. So like take something like customer stories, I think is a really good example. Most B2B companies do their customer stories look and feel the same, right? It's your classic interview setup, get a customer to talk. It's not really a story. It's just someone talking at camera in a nice way, saying what a great company it is to work with. And I always like really fight against that. I think there must be a better way to actually tell a story. And, you know, not to, you know, for example, at my old company, we worked with Smith Toys, so who are obviously become a really big toy shop. They are generally my two kids now favorite place in the world, pretty much, to go. And this is long before I had children, but we did a really cool customer story with them, and the Lego movie had literally just come out. And I was like, well, if we're telling the Smith Toys story and what we're doing with them, why don't we do it with Lego? So we did like a Lego animation, which was like a short 2-minute animation story that told all of the benefits of why we work together, how we work together, and all those kind of things, and just wasn't a company testimonial. And that's just one example, but there are so many different ways that you can tell a story that doesn't have to be the default way. And I think that too many things in B2B sort of fall into this is how it's done, this is the default, this is the template, we know this is safe, it's agreeable way of doing things. And I always kind of want to try and fight against that. You know, webinars is another one. Webinars can be amazing, but always got this, you say webinar, you want to, most people, if I keep saying the word webinar, you're just going to start to yawn in your head because you're, oh God, a webinar. But why, they could be cool, right? Like, you know, on the face of it, it could be good, but it's almost, there's so many bad ones that we've all been to that it's got this bad feel to it. And again, we did one at my old company where we were like, rather than webinars are boring, no one's excited about a webinar, but you're excited about going to the cinema. So we sort of rebranded ours as like sales cycle movies, and we sent out like tickets in the post and popcorn and stuff like that. And it was like, oh, this is actually going to be an event that you look forward to. I just think anything that you can do to sort of jump out of the constraint of the straitjacket that B2B kind of templates can be, I think is really important.
I think that's so language based as well, right? You raised a very valid point. Like, webinar is a boring word. It's just a fundamentally, you hear webinar and you go, oh, here we go. Whereas just rebrand that under a completely different guise. It's the same thing. You're just calling it something else and you're inviting people to something else, unknown what that is. But it makes such a big difference. Anyone that can leap out in those directions. I think a lot of people are fundamentally scared, I think, is an interesting kind of way of looking at it. They don't want to take risk.
Yes, it's so true. Like, thinking of language, you're right. I don't think there's anything else in my whole life that I've ever registered for apart from a webinar. You know, you've only says you know, the call to action, register now. It's almost like that is only applied to a webinar. There's no other thing in your life. You wouldn't go like, oh my God, have you managed to get tickets for Glastonbury yet? Yeah, I've just registered now. For like, you just like, it's not a thing, is it? Like, it's just this one thing is like the only thing and I think, again, because people are scared to change it, because if you call it something else and people aren't going to get what it is, but you're like, I've always been, just change it, call it like, even like save my spot, save my seat, just make it like sound interesting. Not registered now, but anyway, but if you go and look at our post feed now, you're definitely going to find register now on it, and it's going to make me cringe, but there you go.
And you're going to go, right, we're not using that term anymore, that's banned. Update the LLM, you're not allowed to use register now at any point.
we've got a long list of words. Oh yeah, we need to add that one without a doubt.
I need to expand my prompts. Mine is typically just avoid B2B marketing jargon, but I think I need to go in with the specifics because there's a new one every month. But Chris, do you feel like employee advocacy kind of, I don't want to call it the antidote to boring B2B marketing. I think it would maybe be an ingredient, but do you think that kind of factors into your strategy and the reasoning behind it?
I think it can and it can't. I think it really depends on the content, really. I think what is maybe more interesting is that probably what we see advocates want to share is the more interesting stuff. So, you go through and we look at the end of the month or the quarter, what are the most shared posts? Of course, there'll be the stuff that are really important to the company, but actually, generally, it's the cooler content. It's the more interesting stuff that people want to share.
I think finding third party content helps with that as well. Not that every company is producing boring content, everyone's creating, really, really good content in different ways, but where you can splash in stuff that isn't necessarily about your company and might just be like a sideline mention and ties into and, just general industry insights, those start to have a really big impact as well because you can build trust with an audience and then slam them with the webinar post immediately afterwards.
Yeah, I honestly couldn't agree more. I think you really the best advocate program has a real mix, doesn't it, of different types of content, different formats, and I think again, as we've done it, we did a survey with our advocates recently and said, what kind of content do you like? What do you not like? What do you want more of? And that is exactly the sort of thing that comes through. People want stuff that isn't just them because they want to be seen as thought leaders and finding interesting stuff on the New York Times that would be interesting for their audience to share and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a really key part of the mix.
Chris, I suppose a natural next question based on that point is what types of content do you find perform the best? So obviously if people, we know what people want to share, but what tends to resonate with their audiences?
Yeah, I feel like whenever I share this internally, it's never what people really want to hear. But LinkedIn is still a social network, and social media, for all the right and wrong reasons, people like socially content. And so the example I give you is, when we always do, because we're founded in Munich, very proud German company. So in October every year, there's an event that is very important, close to our hearts, and that is Oktoberfest. So every year, our team in Munich will go to Oktoberfest. We'll often have events there. And obviously, as part of that, we'll have amazing photos of everyone enjoying the spirit of Oktoberfest. That post always does ridiculously well on LinkedIn and through advocates. And it is just effectively people smiling and having a nice big beer. and it will do better than all of the other posts that month, which are really strategically important to the company, that are amazing, talking about all the things we really care about, the future of AI and everything. And it will be people having fun, drinking beer will be the top performing post. So sometimes I am, actually inspired by that, not in the basis that we can post about people drinking beer every month, but more that format of simple to very quick flick through the photos, like the content type post, can be really effective. So again, not to give too much away, but literally before I jumped on this call, I was speaking to someone in our team about how we can promote an ebook that we've got coming up. And what's the default B2B thing to do for an ebook? Create a banner. Maybe there's a mock-up of the ebook. There's the title of the ebook. There's a download now. And we were like, well, it's quite a cool ebook actually, and it's a really interesting content, like subject matter. And we were like, well, actually, why don't what will work best on organic? Well, let's get it printed out. Let's make it a physical book, and this is related to the content of it, but let's make it something people might want to read on the beach on a holiday, and let's take a photo of someone who's about to go away reading it on the beach on holiday, and it becomes this thing that's made for organic, so good you'd read it on the beach type content. And you take something really boring, something a little bit more interesting in terms of an immediate content piece on your feed, but it's also based on what kind of tends to work best on LinkedIn, which is that people like seeing photos, they like seeing interesting videos, not boring ones, that kind of stuff. And I guess the second part of the question of what tends to really resonate, and maybe a new trend that we're seeing on LinkedIn in the last sort of 12 months, is that, again, a tough one for us to adjust to, I'll be completely transparent, is that anything that looks and feels like marketing can struggle to do well. So we do amazing video at Celonis. We've got one of the most talented video teams, and probably the most talented video team I've worked with. They're incredible. And the video content is super cinematic, looks incredible on websites and events and stuff, but almost it can look too polished for social, because people look at it and smell marketing, smell advertising. Whereas when it feels authentic and real and rough and shot on an iPhone, that can often do a lot better. So that's a real challenge for us of trying to work out how to get that balance. But yeah, I think playing the fact that it's social and not just a marketing channel is really important.
I think that speaks volumes. Again, it's something that we always talk about as kind of being employee advocacy 1.0 is a phrase that we use quite often. And it is just this idea of giving employees very corporate content for them to go and share on their own LinkedIn feeds. And it's, again, just about modern employee advocacy is focusing on them as individuals, growing their personal brands, and, you know, overly promotional content doesn't tend to do as well. I mean, it's always going to be the old school marketing mentality of, you know, when you have a video like that, I love those raw, unpolished videos, but there will always be a question of, can we stick the logo on there somewhere? It's like, no, this is why it works, is because it doesn't have a logo on it. But yeah, I'm right there with you on that one, Chris. I think that's a fantastic answer. It's social first content is is always what's going to perform best on social. And very lastly, Chris, where can people keep up with you?
LinkedIn is the best place. I'm Chris Sheen on LinkedIn, the Celonis guy, and yeah, you can try and keep me honest. I've have a 2025 promise to myself to post at least twice a week, once which is my own content and one through the advocacy program. So you can keep tabs of me there and see if I'm keeping to my promise to myself.
Love it. Thank you very much for joining us, Chris. Really appreciate it.
It was great. Really enjoyed it, guys. And yeah, keep up the great work. Honestly, love the show. It's amazing.
Thank you.